Betrayal and Bikes. How my family's attempt to disown me backfired spectacularly. Hi everyone. Let me paint a picture for you. I'm Ryan, and in my family, I'm the problem child. At least, that's the label they've always given me. My family's obsessed with projecting an image of perfection and wealth. My parents own a successful chain of jewelry stores. It's not just their business, it's their identity. And in their eyes, I'm the one who's constantly threatening that image. It's not like I'm some slacker. I own a thriving business designing and customizing high-end bikes. Forget the run-of-the-mill sporting goods store models. These are handcrafted machines with meticulous attention to detail, costing more than some luxury cars. My clients include CEOs, celebrities, and serious collectors who crave something unique. The kicker? I've always maintained a low profile. I don't flaunt wealth, and my workshop is located in a renovated industrial building I own. Not some fancy corporate park. I have a small trusted team, and we have a waiting list that's 6 months long. My family? They know next to nothing about this. As far as they're concerned, I'm just pursuing a hobby, instead of joining the family business. Growing up, my parents made it clear that success, money, and appearances were paramount. My older brother, Michael, was groomed to take over the jewelry empire, a true firstborn golden child. My sister, Sarah, is their pride and joy because she married into old money. Then there's David, the youngest, who can do no wrong despite coasting through life on the family name. I never fit. I hated the constant networking and pressure to maintain the facade of a perfect family. Instead, I snuck away from those stifling galas to tinker with anything mechanical. Old radios, broken bikes. It was how I discovered my passion. The more I grew, the more obvious it became that I was on a different path. My parents wanted me to join the family business, but I couldn't imagine anything worse than selling overpriced jewelry to people who cared more about price tags than craftsmanship. I wanted to build something meaningful. So, after college, which they only paid for because they assumed I'd eventually come to my senses, I started working on my bike designs. Initially, it was just me in my garage, but demand grew rapidly. I poured everything into the business, time, energy, money, and it paid off. My designs started getting noticed, and suddenly, I had clients willing to spend incredible amounts of money. Here's where it gets interesting. My family knows I'm self-employed, but they think I'm barely getting by. They have no idea of my success because I don't broadcast it. I drive a normal car, wear regular clothes, and avoid their networking events like the plague. They interpret my quiet life as proof of my failure. The truth is, my business is pulling in 7 figures. With partnerships with major brands, a workshop booked out for months, and a growing global reputation. But to them, success isn't real unless you can wear it or park it in your driveway. Every time I visit, it's the same routine. Michael boasts about his latest strategic partnership, which is just a deal Dad set up for him. Sarah casually drops hints about her fabulous socialite life. David acts like a perpetual frat boy. As for me, I get polite, fake smiles and passive-aggressive comments about my potential. Still working on those bikes? Dad will ask, his tone dripping with disappointment. Yeah, I'll reply, keeping it brief because explaining is pointless. One time, Sarah asked if I needed help finding a real job. I laughed, but she gave me a look of faux benevolence. The worst part? They don't genuinely ask about my business. They dismiss it as a phase. It's insulting but also slightly amusing. They're so entrenched in their world, so convinced that their way is the only way, that they're blind to what's right in front of them. I've kept my success private by choice. I don't feel the need to prove anything. My work speaks for itself, and those who matter know the truth. My clients respect my craft, my team is incredible, and I've built something I'm genuinely proud of. I don't need their validation, and I definitely don't need their approval. But here's the rub. They aren't content to let me live my life. They've been dropping hints, subtle digs about how my choices reflect on the family. Apparently, not being part of the jewelry business is a betrayal. They act like I owe them something, like I'm letting them down by not falling in line. Michael cornered me at Mom's birthday dinner and started lecturing me about family legacy. He actually said, "You're either with us or against us." I almost choked on my wine. Against you? I'm just trying to live my life. Then came the text from Dad. Family meeting. 8 p.m. Be there. Short, sharp, and to the point. So I showed up. Prepared for a lecture, maybe even an argument. I wasn't prepared for the circus that awaited me. The moment I walked in, I could feel the tension. It was like stepping onto a stage where the script had already been written, and I was the only one who hadn't read it. Dad opened the door, giving me a disapproving once-over. He didn't even say hello. Instead he muttered, "You're late," and stepped aside. For context, Dad's definition of late is anything less than 10 minutes early. So yeah, I was technically on time, but to him, I might as well have been an hour behind. I didn't bother arguing. Shrugging, I walked in. The house was exactly as always. Spotless, expensive, and soulless. Everything about it screamed, "Look how much money we have!" From the oversized crystal chandelier to the perfectly staged living room that no one ever used. Speaking of the living room, that's where everyone was gathered, sitting in a perfect semicircle, as if about to hold a press conference. Michael was on one side, dressed in his usual business casual uniform. Sarah was perched next to him, scrolling through her phone. David was sprawled in a chair, looking like he didn't have a care in the world, but I knew he was enjoying the drama. My mom was sitting off to the side like a nervous referee, wringing her hands and giving me that tight smile she always used when things were about to get awkward. And of course, there was my designated chair. A single lonely seat placed strategically in the center of the room, facing them all. It was so obviously an ambush that I almost laughed. Almost. Dad didn't waste any time. As soon as I sat down, he launched into his speech about family unity and preserving the legacy. It was all very official, very rehearsed. Michael chimed in with phrases like long-term strategy and brand image, which made me roll my eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. Sarah wasn't far behind, throwing in comments about how my choices were problematic and how they reflected on the family as a whole. She kept using words like reputation and status, as if those were the only things that mattered. David didn't say much, but he was smirking. I didn't say a word. I just let them talk, nodding occasionally to make them think I was listening. Honestly, it was fascinating to see how much effort they'd put into this. They genuinely thought they were staging some kind of intervention, saving me from a life of failure and embarrassment. Finally, Sarah slid a folder across the coffee table. "This is for the good of the family," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I opened the folder, and that's when I realized how far they were willing to go. Inside were legal documents, neatly organized and full of jargon. I didn't need a lawyer to understand the gist. They were cutting me off. No inheritance, no ties to the family business, no association with the family name. For a moment, I just stared at the papers. Not because I was shocked I'd seen this coming, but because it was hilarious how seriously they were taking this. They genuinely thought this was some kind of punishment. Dad leaned forward, his tone serious and authoritative. "This isn't personal, Ryan. It's about business. Your actions have consequences." I raised an eyebrow. "My actions?" "You've made choices that don't align with the family's values," Michael said, like he was reciting a script. Sarah nodded. "It's not just about you, Ryan. It's about all of us. We have to protect the family name." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Instead, I flipped through the papers, pretending to read them carefully. The whole time I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. Finally, I looked up and said, "Where do I sign?" The room went silent. I don't think they were expecting that. My mom was the first to break the silence. "Ryan, wait. Don't you think you should?" "Nope," I said, cutting her off. "This is exactly what you want, right? To cut me loose. Let's get it over with." Sarah blinked, clearly thrown off. "It's not about cutting you loose. It's about setting boundaries." "Boundaries?" I repeated, smirking. "Sure, let's call it that." Dad gestured to the bottom of the page. "Just sign there." So, I did. I grabbed the pen, scrawled my name at the bottom, and handed the folder back to Sarah. She looked like she didn't know whether to be relieved or insulted. "Is that all?" I asked, standing up. Dad frowned. "This isn't a joke, Ryan. One day, you'll understand that this was necessary." I nodded, already halfway to the door. "Yeah, I'll be sure to send you a thank you card when that day comes. As I walked out, I could feel their eyes on my back, but I didn't look back. They thought they were making some kind of statement. But all they did was prove what I'd known all along. They didn't understand me, and they never would. When I got back to my workshop that night, I didn't feel upset or defeated. Honestly, I felt relieved. That family meeting was just confirmation of something I'd known for years. I wasn't one of them. They had no idea who I was or what I'd built, and they weren't interested in finding out. I flicked on the lights, and the hum of the fluorescent bulbs was more comforting than anything I'd felt in that overdecorated house. The space was my sanctuary. Walls lined with tools, shelves stacked with custom parts, and rows of partially built bikes, waiting for me to bring them to life. It was all mine, built with my own 2 hands. My assistant Ben was still there, finishing up some late orders. He looked up as I walked in. "Hey, how'd it go?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "They disowned me," I said casually, dropping my bag on the workbench. Ben blinked. "Wait, like officially?" "Yep," I said, grabbing a half-finished frame and inspecting the welds. "Signed the papers and everything. I'm no longer part of the family." He let out a low whistle. "Damn." "Yeah," I shrugged. "Honestly, they think they cut me off. But I'm the one who's been carrying them emotionally for years. They did me a favor." We worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the buzz of tools and the clang of metal. It was peaceful, the kind of peace I'd never felt around my family. A couple of hours later, I logged into my business dashboard, and the numbers made me smile. Orders were through the roof. One of our recent designs had gone viral on a cycling forum, and people were practically throwing money at us. Custom requests, bulk orders from international clients, even inquiries from major brands wanting to collaborate. It was overwhelming in the best way. My inbox was flooded with emails. One was from a journalist who wanted to write a feature on me for a lifestyle magazine. Another was from a professional cyclist who wanted a custom bike. And then there was the one that made me pause. A private client offering an absurd amount of money for a one-of-a-kind design. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. My family thought I was wasting my life tinkering with bikes. But this tinkering was bringing in more money than their jewelry business ever would. The thing is, I never cared about the money. Don't get me wrong, it's nice to be financially stable. But that wasn't why I started this. I started it because I loved it, because I wanted to create something with my hands, something that was both functional and beautiful, something that mattered. The money was a bonus, and it let me keep building without compromise. I didn't have to answer to anyone. Not investors, not shareholders, and definitely not my family. The next morning, I met with Josh, my business partner, at our favorite diner. Josh is always 10 steps ahead. He's the reason we've been able to scale so quickly. "All right," he said, sliding into the booth. "What's the plan for dealing with your family?" "What?" I asked, sipping my coffee. "They're going to come crawling back eventually. You know that, right?" I shrugged. "Let them. I'm not going to waste my energy worrying about them. I've got bigger things to focus on." Josh smirked. "Fair enough. Speaking of bigger things, we need to talk about this." He pulled out his laptop and showed me an email from one of our suppliers, offering an exclusive deal on some new materials, but we'd have to commit to a larger production run. "Can we handle it?" I asked. "Easily," Josh said. "With the orders coming in, we could double our output and still have room to breathe. This is a no-brainer." "Do it," I said. Josh grinned. "Done." As the weeks went by, things only got better. The magazine feature came out, and it was a game-changer. The journalist wrote a glowing article about how I'd turned a passion for bikes into a thriving business, complete with photos of our workshop and our best designs. The response was insane. Orders tripled overnight, and our social media accounts exploded. We had to hire 2 more people to keep up with the demand. Ben started training the new hires while I focused on designing our next big project. It was exhausting but exhilarating. Every now and then I'd think about my family, not in a sad way, but with curiosity. I wondered if they'd seen the article or heard about the business. Part of me wanted them to know, just to see the look on their faces. But another part didn't care. I was too busy building something real, something they'd never understand. One day, I got a call from a high-end outdoor gear company. They wanted to collaborate on a limited edition bike for their next product line. It was the kind of partnership that could take us to the next level, and I said yes immediately. Josh and I spent weeks hammering out the details, working late nights to make sure everything was perfect. By the time the prototypes were ready, I knew we had something special. The launch was a massive success. The bike sold out within hours, and the buzz put us on the map in a way we'd never been before. Suddenly, we weren't just a small niche business. We were a brand. And through it all, my family was silent. Not a call, not a text, nothing. I didn't know if they were ignoring me or clueless about what I was doing. Either way, it didn't matter. Their silence didn't last forever. It started with a text. "We need to talk. Urgent family matters." Sarah was the first to break, predictably. She always liked being the peacemaker when things got messy, but her version of peace usually involved making sure everyone saw her as the voice of reason. I ignored it. Then came another text from Michael. "Ryan, let's meet. I think there's been a misunderstanding." I laughed. A misunderstanding? The same guy who'd watched me sign away my inheritance now thought we had a slight miscommunication? Yeah, sure. I didn't reply. The texts kept rolling in, each one more desperate. David finally showed up too with his usual poetic message, "Yo, you around, stuff's happening." But the one that made me pause was from my dad. "Come home. We need you." That was when I knew something had shifted. Dad didn't ask for things, he commanded. "Come home" was as close to begging as he'd ever get. At first, I wasn't sure if I wanted to respond. Part of me wanted to see how far they'd go, but another part knew they'd escalate eventually. It wasn't in their nature to let things lie. They needed control. And I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. A week later, Josh and I were in the workshop when I got a call from an unknown number. "Hello, Ryan," a familiar voice said, overly formal. It was Michael. "We need to talk." I rolled my eyes. "I got your texts. What do you want?" He hesitated, which told me everything. "It's about the family business." Ah, there it was. The family business. "We're having some challenges," he admitted, and I could practically hear the pain in his voice. "It's not a great time for us, and we think you could help." "I could help?" I asked, leaning back and smirking. "That's interesting. Last time we talked, I was an embarrassment to the family. My choices didn't align with your values. Remember?" "Ryan," Michael said, his tone shifting to that condescending older brother voice he loved so much. "Let's not dwell on the past. This is bigger than all of us." I laughed. "No, it's not. It's about you, Michael. And Sarah, and Dad. And the fact that none of you have any idea how to adapt to a world that's moving faster than you are." He tried to push back, but I cut him off. "I'm busy, Michael. If the business is struggling, maybe you should have thought about that before you decided I wasn't good enough to be part of the family." I hung up. The next move came a few days later, when Sarah showed up at my workshop unannounced. I was in the middle of fine-tuning a custom build when I saw her car pull into the parking lot. She stepped out in her designer heels and sunglasses, like she was walking into some fancy boutique. I met her at the door, not bothering to hide my annoyance. "What are you doing here?" She gave me one of her polished smiles. "Ryan, we need to talk." "I'm working," I said, crossing my arms. "This won't take long," she insisted, slipping past me into the workshop. She glanced around, clearly unimpressed by the organized chaos. "So, this is what you've been doing, bikes?" "Yep," I said, not offering more. She sighed and turned to face me. "Look, things aren't great right now. The business is struggling, and Dad's not handling it well. Michael's trying to hold things together, but..." She trailed off, waiting for me to jump in and save the day. I didn't. Finally, she said, "We need you, Ryan." Those words hit differently. For years, I'd been the one they dismissed. Now they needed me. "What exactly do you think I can do?" asked, leaning against a workbench. "You've always been good with creative ideas," she said, her tone just a little too sweet. "And you've clearly been doing okay for yourself here." "Okay," I said, raising an eyebrow. She flinched. "I didn't mean it like that. We're in trouble, Ryan. The market's changing, and we didn't adapt fast enough. Sales are down and Dad's, well, he's too proud to admit we need help." But Michael and I think you could bring something new to the table. I stared at her for a long moment. This was Sarah. The same person who used to laugh at my little project. The same one who once told me I was wasting my potential. And now she was asking for my help. Felt good. Let me get this straight. I said, you want me to come back and fix the business after everything you guys pulled? She nodded. We made mistakes. I'll admit that. But we're trying to make things right. I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. Yeah, no. I'm good. Sarah's face fell. Ryan, please. This isn't just about us. It's about the legacy. Your legacy, I corrected. Not mine. I already have something I'm proud of. And it doesn't involve begging people to buy overpriced necklaces. Her polished facade cracked for a second, and I saw a flash of frustration. But before she could say anything, I opened the door. Have a nice day, Sarah. A week later, Dad himself showed up, looking more tired and worn out than I'd ever seen him. He didn't even bother with pleasantries. We need to talk, he said, his voice low and serious. I leaned against the door frame, crossing my arms. Do we? He sighed and ran a hand through his graying hair. Ryan, I'll admit it. We were wrong about you about everything. The business is failing. I can't fix it. Your brother can't fix it. We need your help. I stared at him, letting his words sink in. This was the man who'd always preached about pride and reputation, standing here begging. I'll think about it, I said, finally stepping aside to let him in. And that was the moment I realized the tables had completely turned. The next few days I let them stew, no calls, no texts, nothing. It wasn't because of anger, it was because I wanted them to see I was capable of living with or without them. Josh, of course, laughed it out. All right, here is the continuation. Josh, of course, laughed it out. So let me get this straight, he said, leaning against the workbench while I fine-tuned a frame. They need you to save their business. But they haven't apologized and they definitely haven't admitted how much they screwed up. Pretty much, I said, smirking. And you're just letting them twist in the wind? I shrugged. Feels fair. Josh laughed. Man, I wish I had your patience. I'd be rubbing it in their faces every chance I got. Oh, don't worry, I said. They'll get what's coming. But it's not going to be on their terms. A few days later, Sarah called again. This time I picked up. Ryan, she said, sounding overly cheerful, and failing miserably. Thanks for finally answering. I was starting to think you were avoiding us. I ignored the bait. What do you want? She hesitated, trying to figure out how to phrase whatever plea she was about to make. I wanted to check in, see if you've given any more thought to, helping out with the family business. I've thought about it, I said. And I have a few conditions. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, what kind of conditions? I want full control, I said, enjoying the moment. Here's the deal. I'll take over the business. You'll stay on as employees. No titles, no power, just workers. You'll answer to me. Sarah practically choked. Wait, full control? Ryan, that's non negotiable. I cut her off. If you don't like it, find someone else to fix your mess. She sputtered for a bit, trying to argue, but I stayed firm. Eventually, she said she'd talk to Dad and Michael and get back to me. The next day, my dad showed up at the workshop again. He looked more put together this time, but the desperation in his eyes was still there. Sarah told me about your conditions, he said as soon as he walked in. He sighed. It's a big ask, Ryan. You're asking us to hand over the company that your mother and I built from the ground up. I leaned against the workbench and crossed my arms. No. I'm asking you to hand over the company that's failing, because none of you know how to adapt. If you want me to save it, you have to let me run it my way. Otherwise, what's the point? He didn't say anything for a long time. I could see the internal struggle on his face. Finally, he nodded. Fine. You can have full control. But there's one condition. Here we go, I muttered. I want you to keep the family name attached to the business, he said. It's all we have left. I thought about it for a moment. It wasn't an unreasonable request, and honestly, I didn't care about the name. Deal, I said. The real fun began after the family begrudgingly signed off on me taking full control. I didn't waste any time diving in. If they thought this was going to be some slow, gentle transition where they could argue or second-guess my decisions, they were dead wrong. This wasn't a democracy, it was a dictatorship. And I was holding the reins. The first thing I did was dismantle their precious hierarchy. Michael had been running operations like he was auditioning for a reality show. His idea of leadership was yelling at people when things went wrong, and taking credit when things went right. That wasn't going to fly. I called a staff meeting at the main office. All the managers, department heads, and key employees were invited. My family showed up too, but they looked uncomfortable as hell, sitting off to the side like kids waiting for the principal to yell at them. All right, I started, standing at the head of the conference table. Let's get one thing straight. The old way of doing things is dead. From now on, this company runs on results, not nepotism. A few people glanced nervously at Michael, who was glaring at me like I just insulted his existence. I pointed at the whiteboard behind me, where I'd outlined a clear strategy. We're streamlining everything. No more bloated budgets, no more unnecessary overhead, and no more outdated practices. If you have ideas, I want to hear them. If you've been stuck under layers of bureaucracy, that ends today. This is your chance to prove what you're capable of. One of the managers raised her hand. What about the family? I smirked. They'll be held to the same standards as everyone else.
No exceptions.
Michael scoffed, but I ignored him. Sarah looked like she wanted to crawl under the table, and David was half asleep. Classic. Next, I tackled the stores. Half of them were bleeding money, because they hadn't been updated in decades. The displays were tired, the layouts confusing, and the staff looked like they were waiting for someone to put them out of their misery. I shut down the worst-performing locations immediately. Some of the employees were upset, which I understood. But I offered severance packages and job placement assistance. This wasn't about punishing people. It was about saving the company. The remaining stores got a complete overhaul. I brought in designers to modernize the spaces, turning them into sleek, minimalist showrooms that focused on the products instead of gimmicky sales tactics. I introduced a new inventory system that made it easier for customers to browse and buy, whether in-store or online. Speaking of online, that was another major area where the company had been failing. Their website looked like it was stuck in 2005, complete with clunky navigation and blurry photos. I scrapped the whole thing and hired a team of developers to build a new site from scratch. It was fast, user-friendly, and optimized for mobile. Within weeks of launching, online sales skyrocketed. Then came the product line. This was where I really put my stamp on things. For years, the company had been churning out the same old gaudy, overpriced jewelry that catered to an aging clientele. It was fine for the older crowd, but it ignored younger customers who wanted something fresh and modern. I introduced a new collection focused on minimalist, sustainable designs. Think elegant pieces made from recycled materials, with a focus on craftsmanship and storytelling. Each piece came with a card explaining where the materials came from and how they were repurposed. It was a hit. People loved the idea of owning something unique that didn't come at the expense of the environment. First, Sarah hated the idea. She argued that it was too risky and not what our customers expect. But when the numbers started coming in, she had to admit I was right. Of course, not everything went smoothly. There were plenty of moments where I had to deal with pushback, mostly from my own family. Michael, in particular, seemed determined to undermine me at every turn. He'd pull me aside after meetings and say things like, "Are you sure this is the right move? I mean, you're new to this level of management." I'd smile and say, "You're welcome to step aside if you think you can handle the changes." That usually shut him up. And David, honestly, I didn't even know what he was doing half the time. He'd show up to meetings late, if at all, and contribute nothing. I eventually gave him a minor role managing the company's social media accounts, which kept him busy enough without causing any real damage. Despite the challenges, the results spoke for themselves. Within 6 months, the company was unrecognizable, in the best way. Sales were up across the board. The new product lines were getting rave reviews. And we'd even started attracting younger, more tech-savvy customers. The best part? My family was starting to feel the power shift. They'd spent their entire lives at the top, but now they were just employees like everyone else, answering to me. One day, I called a meeting with just the 4 of us. Me, Dad, Michael, and Sarah. I wanted to make sure they understood exactly where we stood. Let me be clear, I said, leaning back in my chair. This company is mine now. If you want to stay, you'll do things my way. If you don't like it, there's the door. Dad frowned but didn't say anything. Michael looked like he wanted to argue, but Sarah put a hand on his arm and shook her head. I'm serious, I continued. I'm not here to keep the family legacy alive. I'm here to build something better. If that means letting go of the past, so be it. For once, no one had anything to say. The turning point came when one of the industry's biggest trade shows invited us to showcase the new collection. It was the kind of event that could make or break a company, and I was determined to make an impression. I designed the booth myself, creating a sleek, immersive experience that highlighted the sustainable designs and told the story of the company's transformation. My family was there, of course, but this time they weren't the stars of the show. I was. Customers, journalists, and industry leaders flocked to our booth, praising the new direction and asking how we'd managed to turn things around so quickly. I made sure to give credit where it was due, mainly to the employees who'd worked tirelessly to make it happen. As I watched people admire the pieces I'd helped create, I felt a sense of pride that I'd never experienced before. This wasn't just about saving a business. It was about proving to myself and to them that I was capable of so much more than they'd ever given me credit for. By the end of the show, we'd secured several new partnerships, and the buzz was bigger than ever. My family was starting to understand that I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I was leading the charge. Then one day it happened, the moment I'd been waiting for. We just wrapped up a quarterly review meeting, where I presented some of the best numbers the company had ever seen. I was closing out the presentation when my dad cleared his throat. Ryan, he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I just want to say I'm proud of you. You've done something none of us could have done. You didn't just save the business. You made it better. The room went silent. Even Michael and Sarah looked surprised. Thanks, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Sarah chimed in. Dad's right. We should have seen your potential sooner. You've taken this company to places we never thought possible. Michael nodded reluctantly. You proved us all wrong. I can admit that. It was a strange feeling, hearing them admit it out loud. We've been talking, Dad continued, glancing at the others. We'd like to fix things, not just the business, but us, the family. There it was, the apology, the olive branch. I sat back in my chair, letting their words hang in the air. I appreciate that, I said. But let's be honest. You didn't want me in the family until I became useful. That's not something I can forget. Vanessa looked down, clearly uncomfortable, but didn't argue. I'm not interested in pretending everything's fine, I continued. What we have now works. We're working together, that's it. I don't need anything more from you. Michael frowned. Ryan, come on. We're family. We made mistakes, but we're trying to make it right. You're trying to make it right because you have no choice, I said, keeping my tone calm. If this business had gone under, you wouldn't be here right now. Let's not rewrite history. Dad looked like he wanted to argue, but then he sighed and nodded. Fair enough. Here's the deal, I said, standing up and gathering my notes. I'll keep running the business, and you'll keep doing your jobs. But outside of that, we're good where we are. No more pretending to be a happy family. We tried that and it didn't work. The room was quiet as I left. I didn't feel bad, angry or bitter, just knew where I stood.